Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Kenny Conley. I am the host of the Kidmin Podcast, and I'm very excited today to have as a guest my good friend and former colleague, Dan Pollak. Dan, it is amazing to have you here. When I told you when I started talking about doing the podcast, I was like, Dan, I think you're going to be a
Yeah.
regular guest on this podcast because I love talking to you about ministry. Dan, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah.
Maybe you can actually, it'd be more fun for you to tell people how we know each other.
Yeah. Well, first off, what a do podcast crew. I feel like I need to have like an entry line. Every good podcast has it, you know? So this is my first time, Kenny, on a podcast. So I feel like you guys had to have that. So Kenny, I mean, you met me about a decade ago out in the pits of Arizona, the desert of Arizona.
Right.
And I mean, like, you met me as a purple V-neck wearing, shorts wearing, barefoot intern in a preteen ministry at a church out there. And for good reason, they never let me leave the room. So all the kids knew who I was, but they tried to keep me away from adults, apparently. But you got to meet me. And I think one of your first weekends, you met me up on stage, and one of the punishments of the game, which should never be allowed, just had to make that claimer now, but having to receive a donut as like a mama bird, like to baby bird type situation.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So that's on the podcast. I bet that's a first for the Kidmin podcast right here.
It is definitely a first for
and
the
probably
Kidmin
only
podcast.
time.
You know what? I didn't remember that until you just said this. Like, you just brought back like some baggage that I thought I tucked away.
There's some PTSD right there for sure that's coming back into your mind. So
Dan,
you met me.
Dan was an inherited intern at Mission Community Church in Gilbert, Arizona, and he's actually one of my favorite people to have worked with out of all my years. I say that about most of the people that I've worked with, but right now on this podcast, I can say that with all truth. One of my favorite people that I've worked with. You were an intern, and then you became part-time staff, and we had to tell you to be at the church less because now that we're paying
legally you have to be here less. Yes. Which I was like, I can do that. I think, I don't know. There's times you're like, Dan, leave, go home, go do something else, go see a movie. You just can't be here. So, and I got the hint eventually.
You did. And then then you actually ended up doing great things. You actually helped me lead the student ministry there in a transition, and then you came on full-time staff. I left you.
You did. That's where my PTSD gets in. So
yes. And then but then you, out of an amazing turn of events, you continue to develop yourself and work on yourself. And how many years has it been since you stepped on as a kids director at Flatirons?
It will be 3 years this March that I've been out here in Denver, Colorado, or as I like to call it, Danver. So
Denver.
Yeah.
This is the thing about Dan, is this, even my kids call Denver Danver. They've never been to Denver, but they call it Danver because of this man.
There we go.
And here's the great thing to know is that Dan, he knows everybody. He doesn't make himself a stranger. He connects with people. And so in the ministry world, Dan, I'm like amazed. I meet people and like, oh yeah, I talked to Dan last week, and I was like, Dan Pollak, right? Yeah, you talk to Dan, and you beat me to people now, and so I meet people, and you're the common thread. So, for those of you that are listening or watching this podcast, Dan's a guy to know in the world of ministry, kids ministry, DJing at women's events, whatever.
Yeah. I'm gonna be DJing a men's event too. So I do the women's events and I do the men's events now, which is a totally different vibe. A lot more Usher at the women's events, a lot more Trace Adkins at the men's events.
Yes. So, Dan, it's a delight to have you on this podcast, and we're going to do some more, and you're probably going to be a regular person because you're actually one of the smartest people I know. I remember when I got to Mission and I was having lunch with all my staff, and I was like, all right, I got to go take the intern out or whatever. And I remember leaving that lunch and calling my wife and saying, I think I had the most stimulating conversation out of all my conversations with the intern. And you recommended a book that I read, and I loved it. And I was like, this is amazing. And so I'm so thrilled that you're here because I love talking ministry with you, and you're an innovative person. I like to brag and tell everyone that I taught you everything I know, but the reality is, whatever I did teach you, you've far exceeded that, and you're a constant learner, and so many of the things that you put your hands on today are things that you've breathed life into. You've done the research, you read the books, you met the people, and so I think we're gonna have a lot of fun in this conversation. And we're
Yeah.
talking about VBS. We're going to continue to talk about VBS this whole month. And I want to have a conversation about VBS because now you and I didn't do VBS together because
Hmm.
we didn't do that at Mission, but at Flatirons, shortly after you got there, maybe the next year, or was it maybe your second year there, you
Yep.
guys launched a VBS program. You didn't call it VBS, but it was essentially VBS.
It
So
had
maybe
similarities for
before
sure. Yeah.
yeah, so maybe before we dive into this fully, why don't you tell me, because we actually just talked about this before we hit the record button. I was like, when did you ever do VBS as a kid? Like I remember your history because almost your whole faith history was revolved around Mission, the church where you were interning
Yep.
at, and this is where you started serving and all those things. But I knew that Mission didn't do VBS any of the time that we were there. But Dan, what was your first VBS or a prominent VBS experience?
Yeah. So I mean, I grew up in the church, and so started at like kind of like Free Will Baptist church growing up. So I've dabbled with the denominations, and I used to go to VBSs at my grandma's church, but I would also say I think my parents would just kind of do the classic thing and VBS shop, and
Right.
so I actually ended up going to a VBS at a church plant that was meeting out of a high school in my hometown of Gilbert, Arizona. And I think it was like 4 or 5 years old is when I went. I think I was going into kindergarten, so I went to this VBS at the high school, uh, and it was for a church plant called Superstition Springs, which long term became Mission Community Church. Was not attending
Wow.
there yet, but it was there that I just remember going. I had always been in love with Jesus, but it was like at that camp at that VBS that like I walked out of it, and I just started saying the prayer, like accepting Jesus into my heart in the backseat of the car. Like my parents are driving, and I just started blurring out, like, yeah, Jesus, like I believe in you. Like I want you to come live in my heart. I'm just doing this out loud, and they're just like, "Oh, should we like pull over and pray with you? Like, what is this type of thing?" So, yeah,
So
that like I
basically, you're telling me is you led yourself to Jesus
yeah,
in the
yeah,
back seat of your parents' car on the way home from VBS.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Who
How
needs to partner with
appropriate.
parents? So
Yeah, who needs to partner with parents when oh my gosh, Dan. And the funny thing about this is like, yes, I've known you for 10 years
yeah,
and I know you really well. Like I know things about you,
hmm,
that you would rather me not know about you or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
But this is the first time, like today, like you telling me the story is the first time I heard about this. I knew that is that Mission where you started serving and
yeah,
it's where God called you in ministry and you latched into those preteens for a really long time. I didn't know your VBS story was part of Mission when it was still a church plant known by Superstition Springs.
yeah.
Um,
I didn't
that's
start
that's
attending there
that's
until about 6 or
unbelievable.
7 years later. So
Yeah. So
that's
your
crazy.
roots are connected to VBS
Yeah.
at the church that would be so transformative. That's amazing. So okay, that's really cool. So talk about you guys launched
Hmm.
VBS or you called it camp. And I want to talk today's the kind of the topic of the conversation is about reinventing VBS. Tell me a little bit about what the instance of VBS you guys created at Flatirons, what it was, what you called it, how it looked like VBS, how it didn't look like VBS. Tell me a little bit more about what Kids Camp looks like.
Yeah, so I mean, it originally stemmed because one of our executive pastors, Carl, has a huge heart for VBS, and really wanted to see that like kind of come be the fruition when he was the next gen pastor, and even as he stepped more into like our lead team role and everything, he wanted this to like become the thing at Flatirons,
Mm.
just because since like COVID and since like kind of like the early 20s, that's a weird sentence to say, but like since like
Wasn't the
that.
Roaring 20s? It was the COVID 20s, I
It's
guess,
been a
right?
wild 20s, for sure.
That's good.
That's what history will define it as. But I think like he brought in this kind of vision of like, hey, we want to do something at BBS. Like he has a huge heart for it. And like, but obviously we have a unique culture here at Flatirons, which like we live in a very kind of pre-Christian area. I think it's safe to say. A lot of people love to talk about post-Christian. Uh, Denver,
Yeah.
Colorado's got a lot of pre-Christian. And so it's like we can't just do VBS like in a vacation Bible school and like people understand what that means. And so
Yeah.
part of it is like we wanted to do something of similarity to like the model, because like there's only so much you can kind of do that, like to innovate from just the general things that make VBS what it is. But it's like we wanted to call it kids camp. And
Yeah.
so we started to kind of work around with what this idea looked like. We wanted it to obviously have its like high energy sessions. The things that make VBS great are, you know, like a lot of those rotational aspects when it comes to you know, going around doing crafts and doing rec or games, and you know, there's snack. And our biggest thing is too, and I know this is always the heart of VBS, like there's always groups, but we wanted to take it a step further with making it more intentional with groups, because that's
Yeah.
been a big driving force of our church over the last couple years in our kids ministry, is really amping up what the groups experience look like
Mhm.
becoming a more small group based ministry where we are putting consistent leaders into it. And so in the same way that like a student camp always pushes for the leaders who are leading every single week to come and also be the leader at camp, because it's like you get a whole year's worth of like time and energy and memories spent at camp as you do like throughout the course of you serving in a year. Like we wanted to take that same idea of like, hey, we want our leaders who serving kids ministry in elementary coming in and being the same leaders for their kids during kids camp. And so those are some of the things like right off the bat that we're thinking about, like, hey, these are like what we want to do to kind of make this different, to make it unique to our context, and also just experiment with some ideas.
Yeah. No, I love that. And you did your kids camp in the evenings, right? You didn't do the daytime at all. What
Yeah.
what led to the decision for doing nighttime camp?
Yeah. So, I mean, we went back and forth, and uh, I think a lot of like camps, like there's a few out here in our area that do it during the day. And, you know, they're at just some smaller churches that have been doing it for, you know, the last 10, 20, 30 years. Um, And, you know, like they offer it for about 3 to 4 hours. And a lot of it's like, it can feel at times like glorified childcare. And that's not the hope with
Mhm.
VBS, but
Yeah.
it can feel like that sometimes because parents are always looking for things for their kids to do during the summer.
Right.
And we wanted to be more intentional by trying to get our volunteers that normally serve on the weekend to come be a part of this. And like it's harder during the day to ask for some of that because, you know, that requires them to take off time from work, use PTO. They may not have that flexibility. Whereas nighttime, like, it's asking someone to come for 2 to 3 hours to come like serve. Uh, for about 4 days a week. And so a big part was like the driving force behind our volunteers to get some of the better volunteers that like we knew we wanted to
Mhm.
match with the model of what we're trying to do. And I think too, like, and this is like these are the areas that we kind of learned with like a nighttime versus a daytime. Nighttime, I think, is actually going to draw a slightly older elementary audience, as like daytime
Yeah.
may actually draw more of a younger elementary audience.
Mm.
And we knew, like, especially like last year with year two, like we wanted to do an older energy to the programming aspects. And so those were a couple of the things that led us to doing some of the nighttime approach and just better serving some of like our volunteers, but also like just people in the community, because so many of our people kind of work and are navigating those things. So we just felt like it was going to serve our community a lot better.
Yeah. I love that. Those were all great moves because the reality is like VBS has been around forever. Like
Hmm.
I'd be curious to know exactly how long it's been around. It's probably been around for 80 years, maybe longer, who knows? And it's obviously a model that works. Here's the reality, like even in the smallest, most traditional little church, whatever,
Hmm.
kids come to it and they love it. They have fun. Like it's a model that kids, you know, most kids want to do a craft.
Yeah.
They want to play games. They want to snack. They want to hear a Bible story. Like these things, they want to sing songs. So like it just works.
Hmm.
But I think that in 2026 or whatever year you might be listening or watching this, you have to ask yourself the question is um is the model of VBS at my church or the churches around me,
Yeah.
is it staying up with the culture? Is it still continuing to reach? And you are having to establish that of like, okay, morning VBS, maybe younger kids, later VBS, older kids, morning VBS, maybe a scarcity of volunteers,
Hmm.
a lot less men able to
Yeah.
serve, evening VBS, a lot more dads and men able to serve. Like you're having to like navigate all the different variables that would help define what VBS would look like
Yeah.
at your church. Now, after having launched it and experienced it, what was your because this was your first time to lead, a camp or a VBS
Yeah.
at a church that you worked at. Like, how did you feel about it? Like, and how you reinvented it and created it to be what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I mean, the first year we learned a lot. Like we've done this the past couple years, and the first year I just remember like we came out of it and like there was a lot of things like we we played it safe, rightfully so. Like we didn't do it at our largest campus. Like we kind of did it at our smaller campuses to just
Hmm.
kind of pilot some ideas. And I think we came out of it and realized like we can take this up a notch a little bit, like when it came to our programming, be more intentional with our programming. We could be more intentional of how we partner with other ministries from like our connections spiritual formation team of like how do we like partner with parents well during this, how do we work with our student ministry to really bring in teenagers to serve. Like I'm pretty sure both years so far like my rec team is mainly middle school boys. Uh, and I'm like, hey, you
As
want
they
to,
should be.
yeah, like you want to hang out with your youth pastor for about 2 hours every single night. You should come
Yeah,
serve in rec. I'll get you like a Foot Locker jersey and like come be a part of that. And they were great. They were awesome. And like it was an easy way too of like putting some dads in that had never served in kids ministry. They're like, yeah, I'll come do rec.
yeah.
And it was awesome, and so, uh, those are some of the lessons we kinda learned in the first year, and, like, last year, like, year 2, it's like we took it up. Like, we took some risk. We made more wow moments from our programming, like during the sessions, like being more intentional with like live worship, not like full band, but like full like teams up on the stage. Uh, to like how we programmed like the rotations and how we set up our small group times better. And it we saw the differences starting to just like realize like our people were being bought in. They were excited. I think that was the other part too, is like year two is a lot easier to recruit volunteers than year one because like
Yeah.
when you're starting something from scratch, like people are like, what is this? Like, no, like I just want to drop off my kids. And it's like, no, I want you to come be a part of this. And year two, like we had people asking us in like December, like before the summer, just like, so can you put me down to serve at kids camp this year? Because they're like, it was so much fun last year. And so, yeah, those were some of the things that like we kind of took and learned. Uh, and the excitement about it is like starting to build the culture of like, hey, like kids ministry is doing something big through like the camp format.
Yeah, that's really cool. What would you say? Because I know that you guys used a VBS curriculum, so you
Hmm.
kind of started with that from the beginning, and then you designed it from there. What areas would you say you kind of went off script? Like we had the the curriculum, and it provided a base, maybe activities or maybe the bottom lines or whatever. How did you end up morphing? And it's still with this idea of like every church needs to figure out where and how they reinvent
Yeah.
themselves in this. Where did you guys go? What stayed the same and what went off script?
Yeah, I think when it came to the content aspect, like the curriculum that we utilized, like we used the teaching videos that were a part of it. We
Hmm.
incorporated some of the language, like from like some of the scripts, and like obviously made it our own into the aspect of just like setting up the video, breaking down the video, the bottom lines portion, and just the theme of the whole camp. And then that also played a factor into the content that we then brought into our small groups of like using that time intentionally. Outside of that, I would say like we looked at it when it came to like the rotation aspects of uh like crafts and stuff, and some of it inspired it, but a lot of it like we then just kind of looked at it as like a basis and like came around with like some of our own ideas to try and match the theme of what we were wanting to do both years. And so I would say we kind of took a different approach to the realm of how we program, especially. And I know like we can talk a little bit about this too. Um, when it came to programming, we didn't program this in like some ways how VBSs are very like skit forward, or maybe it feels like it's a giant like production of sorts, like a drama.
Yeah.
We went more of a kind of segmented approach when it came to programming. And it's kind of taking like, basis from like various things that, I've gotten to experience in the student world, being at various camps from, CIYs to seeing how other BBSs have gone, things over the past, taking more of a segmented approach. Because at the end of the day, too, like especially last year, we had to define target like audience, and that was a fourth
Right.
grade boy. Because I think anybody listening to this can say that a fourth grade boy is probably the hardest person to engage in your ministry, because they would rather
Right.
do anything than the thing that you're asking them to do. So we wanted to be like, hey, if we can engage a fourth grade boy, if we can get them excited about worship, if we can get them excited about teaching, not just like excited about rec, but like, oh my
Right.
gosh, like they're engaging, they're in the programming, like that's going to be a win. And like, we did it. Like we had several emails. I know I received some of our other campuses received some, of like fourth grade boys like asking to like listen to some worship songs in their cars, like
Mm.
from their parents on the way home. And so we took a far different approach when it came to that programming aspect, and utilizing the like content curriculum we bought. Like we used it to like for the Bible stories, but a lot of it too, like we used it as a basis and then kind of like thought of our own ideas behind it.
Yeah, I know you told me a lot about what you guys did, and you're a programming genius. I hired you last fall to come and program out a weekend retreat for preteens because you're so good at it. Tell me if I'm right when saying this. Like you probably borrowed pretty heavily from how would I program a middle school or high school camp, and bring some of those elements to really target those older kids. Is that true?
Yeah, I think like we took like the layout that you would experience normally like at a student retreat or a
Hmm.
camp like over the summer, of like creating segments for what it looked like. So it wasn't just like one long continuous thing, but then we did incorporate like every single one of our campuses. And I'm thinking like this last year in particular, when I was kind of over the head of the programming aspect, like our host still kind of ran in a characterization like, so that's where the kids camp, the VBS like normality like kind of came into it, but they were more the characters in the midst of these segments.
Yeah.
And so like I'm thinking about like my campus in particular, like we had like they had like, kind of those goofy like BBS names that like hosts love to do, like Junior Ranger Jaden, and Girl Scout or Camp Scout Kira or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, the kids like were able to remember that. They had costumes that kind of matched with our theme. And I even gave them the freedom to like kind of expand and do their own stuff, like to ad lib. But like we didn't have like a full on script. Like we had bullet points of like, hey, these are the things you have to touch on. Like we worked through that like in the training with our host. But then it was more segmented of like, hey, like you're gonna do this game, and then this is a transition into, uh, you know, you having a brief dialogue around like, hey, worship, and like bringing a worship leader out. This is how you're going to set up the Bible story. This is how you're just like break down the Bible story, uh, and like having various different elements that came into it, so that way it felt like every couple, like anywhere from 3 to 8 minutes, like we were switching up the flow. So it felt like it was just always fresh and new, and keeping kids engaged. Cause I think that's one of the biggest things is like in this day and age, like with kids having access to like, various like digital tools and stuff like that, their like tolerance for longer produced things are not there as much. So like we wanted to
Yeah.
keep them engaged by like constantly feeling like there's a flow, but also not just like ramping them up the whole time and then just, like creating like a burst of like of energy that there to be a rocket that explodes. Like we're able to kind of help them like at times settle down and like lean in, where other times it's like, hey, no, I want you to go nuts, like when the church
Hmm.
clap is happening. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And you had to do this. I know you did this for the last 2 years. The first year was I know you worked really hard to make sure that it executed really well at your campus.
Hmm.
Your hands were on a lot of it, but then by year 2, you were kind of leading the charge for what camp look like at all the other campuses,
Yeah.
in addition to your campus, but I feel like you raise up enough leaders, you could delegate more. What were some of like, for those that might be in a situation where they've got multiple campuses too, what are some things you learned from year 1 to year 2 about how to have a consistent experience across campuses?
Yeah, I think the more big picture you can be for all the campuses, the better. Like if you're at like a multi-site approach, like you bring in your kids people from all of it, like you have kind of sub teams. Like in our case, like I was kind of the lead person when it came to camp this last year. And like some of the directors, we put them on like, hey, you guys are helping own the rec aspect. So like you have to come in, like these are the things we're gonna need, the timeline. We had somebody over like snacks, we had somebody over crafts, we had the small group portion. I kind of
Mhm.
helped own the programming aspect. And then we would come in, we would have these meetings, but then it was like our biggest thing was we wanted to streamline this uh and create as close of the same experience at all of our campuses as possible. And so like, one of the things is like we have a website for our volunteers. And so it's like we wanted to put everything like that any of the teams, like if you were serving on crafts at like our Aurora campus, like you have access to the same things that the person that's doing crafts at the West campus like has access to because it's all living on one landing page on the website. We did like a large digital training where like people jumped into like a massive like Zoom call, which was awesome. And like we learned things from there too, but like got to cast vision. And so we wanted to bring more structure and excitement into it and realizing like, hey, because I think this is the one thing like student ministry is always good with this, like bringing all their volunteers together, especially in a multi-site approach. Realizing like here's the bigger picture, like you're serving students in like your community, but like you're getting to serve like students all over. Like I feel like kids ministry, it can feel like a silo at times, even in a
Yeah.
multi-site. And it's like, no, we wanted to bring that same energy into it. Of like, no, you're all part of serving these kids at various points, like across the Front Range and the mountain towns of like Colorado out here. And like, I think that was a win because it brought energy for their campus, but also the bigger picture of we're getting to serve kids across our communities.
Right. You also I wanna touch back on something you just said.
Yeah.
You did in your 2nd year, you ended up centralizing training. And so you didn't actually do in-person training. You did it online with Zoom and then you recorded it so people could watch it later. Talk about because I remember I think when you were doing it, maybe you were frustrated a little bit by not everybody was signing up or whatever, but like at the end, like what you know now and what you experienced, pros, cons, what do you say about digital training? Maybe either in place of in-person training or supplemented? What are your thoughts on it?
I think so. The reason why it didn't like work out as well is like this was kind of a later idea in the game, but it was like an idea of like, no, we should do this, sort of thing. So I'm an advocate for like the bigger picture, for like especially with the multi-site approach of bringing in uh like everybody into this. Like you're part of one team just in multiple locations, right? The
Yeah,
classic multi-site language, but it's like, hey, like we realized too that it was going to be difficult to try and find like one time like on a Sunday too for somebody to drive to a central location and like do all this
right.
stuff. It also didn't help that our largest site was in the midst of a remodel, so like we couldn't do it there. So we went with the digital approach, and I think it was a good attempt. I think we could have done things a little bit better and like just like preparing people, really like pushing for the mandatory. Like, hey, if you're a part of kids camp, you need to be on this.
You
And
gotta
if
do
you
it.
can't, like communicating with your director that like, hey, this is like why. But it's like you're gonna have to like make this up in a sense because it's like we want you to be as prepared and equipped as possible for when it comes to uh like kids camp and to just make sure that you can excel in your role because like you want to always strive for a level of excellence behind it.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's actually one of the things, the takeaways from COVID. Like we
Hmm.
were already using Zoom for certain things, but since then, like every time I do a training, sometimes I will do an in-person training and then we record it and we just say, hey, if you can't
Yeah.
make it an in-person one, you do the let's do the online one. Be sure you do the online one, and we're creating a culture where that's like, hey, I could do both,
Yeah.
or I could do one or the other. And I think that's really great, especially if you're in a multi-site experience where you want to create that consistency across, making sure that your hosts are learning the same things and because I could imagine too, I know you did a overall training and your website was amazing. I borrowed pieces of it for my own. Um, because you actually even provided, now I remember you created like printed documents. If you're a host, this is your role description. If you're
Yeah.
a storyteller, this is your description, and then you
Shout out
had
to
some
AI,
details in there. But I could imagine down the road you could do a online training for all your hosts across all your campuses.
Oh,
You could do
absolutely.
an online training and then again, it's available for video if you didn't make it.
Yeah.
But I could see the value in that of like, hey, we do a 45-minute general VBS training, but then in the coming weeks, we're going to have a training for hosts, for older elementary group leaders.
For
I can
sure.
see that really specializing out and being really successful, right?
Yeah. I mean, like if you did a like digital training, you can set up breakout rooms where you get
Right.
to like kind of talk about all those things. If you did an in-person training, like, your multi-site approach, like you're not that far and it's not hard to like host at a central site. Like you do like the big vision cast, but then it's like you do the individual breakouts. Like, hey, if you're anything to do with snacks, you go to this room, like stuff like that. So I think, yeah, helping them feel equipped and prepared, that was like our biggest thing. And just because like we were only in year 2, like we
Mhm.
wanted our people to like, hey, like realize first off, we learned a lot from year 1, and like we are raising the bar of what this looks like, but you're not going to go into this empty handed. Like you're going to feel equipped, ready, and just empowered to go in and like rock it in your role at kids camp. And I would say like a lot of people noticed the difference between year 1 and 2 because like our people
Yeah.
felt ready and they felt empowered too to come in
Yeah.
and bring so much energy, and so many of our people were just excited to be there. Like that was the crazy part about it. And so that's one of the best parts, like, I think we learned from, like, year 2 of, like, man, like, our volunteers just felt a lot more, which just helped increase the, uh, experience overall.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, we're talking about bringing your own flavor, perspective, reinventing a program that has existed for longer than we've been alive.
Yeah.
And how do we make this real? At the church where I'm at, we've called it Kids Camp or Ridge Camp Ridge Kids for years, but it felt like VBS. It felt
Yeah.
like a VBS, and there's nothing wrong with that. But also the idea is like if there's 20 VBSs in your town, what would it take to offer something that feels different?
Yeah.
And so and that's what you guys did, and that's what
Yeah.
we did. We decided because I live in kind of a rural mountain, North Georgia mountain area, and so we said, what if we actually made it feel like camp? And so we had woods right next to our church, and so we did recreation in the woods. We created
Let's
some
go.
like low ropes activities.
Little
We
Goonies
got it.
action out there.
Yeah, we have a hilltop behind our church, and so
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a hike, but it's a walk up a hill. But we had a fire pit up there. We told the Bible story for the older kids around the campfire.
Yeah, yeah.
So all of a sudden, we're able to say, "Hey, it's Camp Ridge Kids. It's a summer camp experience, but is running on is what we could say is powered by VBS
Yeah.
is really what it is." So I would say, and some you might have like other ideas of like maybe it's a sports camp. But again, it's powered by the mechanisms, and you're still going to do Bible, you're still going to
Mhm.
do craft, you're still going to do some of these things, but you're going to spend maybe a couple hours doing soccer or football or baseball, whatever it is. But I mean, the world is what's that? Was it the world is your oyster? I don't know. Go do whatever you like, whatever
Yeah.
inspires you,
Yeah.
or what seems like would really inspire your community, your kids, your families. And yes, buy that curriculum because it's so much easier.
Oh, yeah. You don't need to
And
create
then
your own.
yeah, don't create your own. I mean, if you're a glutton for punishment, create your own. But there's so many great options out there. Buy it, strip it down, use what you need, discard the rest, and
Yeah.
have fun creating something special. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's really helpful. I think that more of us need to breathe a little life. Like maybe it's an opportunity to evaluate what we have, breathe a little life, and reinvent. And maybe it's just reinventing parts of it. Maybe it's reinventing your large group experience,
Yeah.
or it's reinventing your Bible story experience, or the registration, whatever it may be, or the theming. So that would be the walkway, the challenge, I think, from this episode is like, what part of my VBS needs to be reinvented? But Dan, it's so great to have you on. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah.
I know
Thanks
we're
for
going to
having
have
me.
Yeah, for sure. I know we're gonna have many more conversations as well because you're kind of the Kidmin man. I love talking to you about all things ministry. And but everyone else, thanks for watching today. We'll be back again next time with another conversation, especially about VBS. Thanks again for joining us on the Kidmin Podcast.